In April of 1789 in Montgomery County, New York, one man worked a single sugar maple that had been tapped in the same spot for years. Over 9 days, from the middle of April to the end of it, he boiled the sap from that one trunk down to 20 pounds and 1 ounce of grained sugar. 2 years later, Dr. Benjamin Rush set that exact number in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, read aloud to the American Philosophical Society as hard proof that one wild tree could stand against a field of cane. 20 pounds and 1 ounce from one tree. He never even gave us the man's name, only that he sat as a justice of the peace and that the tree was a returning one, not a fresh cut. Sit with that weight a moment. Picture it on a scale. 20 pounds of sugar is heavy as a sack of milled flour resting in your 2 arms, and it came out of bark and freeze and firewood, out of 9 days of patient boiling. Now, here is the question I want you to hold on to. What does that one tree's kettle weight actually prove? Because folks love to wave that number around. I'm going to leave it hanging right here, and I promise you, friend, I will come back to it at the very end. Do not let me forget. Today, most folks could not sweeten a whole pantry from a living tree if the store closed on a Monday. They could not tell you which tree, which month, which weather, or which end of the boil. And I want to be careful how I say this next part. That is not a moral failing. They are good at their job. The people who sell you sweetness by the jug are very, very good at their job, and they have had well over a century of practice at making you forget you ever had another way. But here's the twist. Nobody outlawed the maple. Nobody sent men to your grandfather's woodlot to pull the spiles out of his trees. There was no ban, no raid, no padlock on the sugarhouse door. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to see. What happened was a shelf. In 1887, a grocer named Patrick J. Towle, working out of the St. Paul area of Minnesota, put out a syrup he called Log Cabin. It was not pure maple. It was a maple-flavoured blend, cheaper to make, easier to pour, and dressed up in a little tin cabin a child would beg for. It rode the national grocery trade from town to town. In 1927, it was bought up by General Foods, and from there it rolled onto shelves in every corner of the country. Understand what that did? It did not attack the maple tree. It simply sat beside it and cost less. It was there, in the store, every week, at a price that never made you wince, and a blend that is always there at a price you can bear will beat a pure thing you have to work 9 days to make, every single time. That is the honest mechanism, friend, not a conspiracy, a convenience. The maple did not lose a fight, it lost a habit. Think of your household grocery bill the way I do. For most of this country's history, sweetness was a thing your people made. It cost labour and firewood and cold mornings, but it cost no cash. Then, 1 decade at a time, a hand learned to slip quietly into your pocket. Not a fist, a hand. Gentle, regular, unremarkable. A jug here, a bottle there, a few dollars a month you stopped even noticing because everyone around you paid the same and called it normal. That hand is still in your pocket right now. It has been there so long you've stopped feeling the weight of it. And the strangest part is that the thing it replaced was never gone. The tree in the fence line did not disappear. The freeze and the thaw still come every year and push the sap right up the trunk. The same as they did for that Montgomery County man in 1789. The knowledge got mislaid, that is all. It got outpriced and outshelved and set down somewhere, and nobody went back for it. I aim to go back for it. That is what this whole telling is about. Because that one number, 20 pounds and 1 ounce, is not a museum piece, it is a door. Rush did not cite it to fill a page. He cited it because it settled an argument. A single wild tree, tapped by a hand that knew what it was doing, could feed a family's sweetness for a year without 1 coin crossing a counter. We have spent 100 and some years learning to forget that, and we didn't even get a fight out of it. We got a tin cabin and a lower price and a hand in the pocket. Nobody had to twist our arm. So before we count our way down through the men and the machines and the rules that carried this practice from that 1789 kettle all the way to a jug on your shelf in 2026, I want to put the whole thing on one scale. 1 tree, 1 season, 1 weight a man wrote down so carefully it survived 230 some years. And it all comes down to a single number, the one I want you to carry out of here today. And it all comes down to a single number, the one I want you to carry out of here today. 40. About 40 gallons of clear sap, thin and faintly sweet, boiled down to 1 single gallon of syrup. That is the whole equation, top to bottom. From one well-tapped tree in a good season, you gather close to 10 gallons of sap on a tap. Boil that down at the same ratio, and you're left with roughly 1 quart. 1 quart from one tree in one spring. Write that on the inside of your cupboard door, 40 to 1. It is the only figure you need to begin. Now let me tell you who is saying this to you. I am Christopher Marin, and my family has worked this same patch of ground for 7 generations. I keep a leather journal on the shelf above the wood stove. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Marin. The cover has gone soft as an old glove, and the ink inside has turned brown as tea left steeping too long. I read it by lamplight, friend, the way he wrote it. It is a ledger of the same ground under my boots season after season, the same trees, the same cold mornings. Now the title on this video needs a gentle correction, and Samuel would want me to make it. I say winter, but deep winter is not the season. December and January, the tree is dormant, and it gives you nothing. Real flow needs a swing. Nights that drop near 20 to 25 degrees, days that climb near 40 to 50. Freeze, then thaw, then freeze again. That pressure is the tree taking its own slow pulse, pushing sap up a warming trunk. In most of our country, that means mid-February into April, not the dead of the year. And here is the part folks get backward. That short window, 4 to 6 weeks, is not a bridge to some later harvest. That window is the harvest. When the buds swell and the sap turns cloudy, it is done. So I gathered every one of these old ways into one book, and I wrote it plain enough that a beginner could tap a tree by Sunday. It is the field guide I wish someone had handed me at 20. If you want it, the link sits right below this video. I will ask you one small thing, and only once. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. Do it so the next neighbour searching for these lost skills can actually find them. Every subscriber pushes these old ways in front of one more person who needs them. Before we start the count, let me show you 2 things down the list, out of order, and I am not going to resolve either one yet. Number 2 is a corn sweetener that shipped out of Clinton, Iowa in 1967, and it beat this craft on price alone. And number 4 is the University of Vermont research that actually shrank the tap hole. I am not getting to either until we are near the bottom of this list. Hold them in the back of your mind. So let us start the count. Number 7. Long before the Pilgrims ever landed, there was a Frenchman named André de Thévet. In 1557 he published an account called Les Singularités de la France Antarctique. The UVM Library's Maple Research Guide holds it up as the earliest known European record of native people making maple sugar, 1557. That predates the 1620 landing by more than 60 years. So understand this plainly. The craft is not ours by invention. We inherited it. Whoever your people were, they learned this from someone who stood here first, which makes the how of it a matter of respect. Before you drill into anything, identify a true sugar maple. Look for opposite branching, the twigs set in pairs, straight across from one another. Look for grey bark, deeply furrowed on an older trunk. Look for pointed brown buds at the very tips. Tap the wrong species, and you have wasted a hole and a whole season on a tree that will not pay you. The correct identification cost you nothing. Nothing but a slow, careful look before the bit ever turns. Number 6. Move ahead to 1791. Dr. Benjamin Rush wrote a letter, and it was read aloud to the American Philosophical Society. In it, he framed a single homestead maple as an ethical answer to slave-grown cane sugar. Sweetness bought with a family's own labour instead of another man's bondage, and he put general figures to it. An ordinary tree, Rush said, would yield 20 to 30 gallons of sap across a season, and from that, 5 to 6 pounds of sugar, 5 or 6 pounds, off one ordinary tree. The method he laid out is the same one we still use. Tap the tree, collect the sap, and reduce it by heat until it grains. There is nothing lost between his page and your kettle, and here is the payoff that mattered to a founding-era family and still matters now. This was a sweetener you bought with labour alone. No cash across a counter, no coin owed to anyone. You traded your cold mornings and your firewood, and the tree traded you sugar. Picture it. Sap rising in a warming trunk, and a full sugar tin sitting on the shelf at the end of it. Because the next hands to change this craft did not hold a kettle, they built a machine. Because the next hands to change this craft did not hold a kettle, they built a machine. That brings us to number 5. His name was Gustav Henry Grimm. Born in Baden, Germany in 1850, he founded G.H. Grimm and Company in Hudson, Ohio in 1881. For a long while, boiling sap was a one-kettle chore. You hung an iron pot over a fire and you waited. Grimm changed the arithmetic. In 1890, he built a factory in Rutland, Vermont, set right beside the railroad line. By April of 1891, the Maple Syrup History Archive records 500 of his flue pan evaporators sold in Vermont alone. That is the moment sugaring turned from a chore into an industry. Now here is what Grimm understood, and what you can borrow without buying his machine. Sap boils off from its surface, not its depth. A deep kettle hides most of the water where the heat cannot reach it. A shallow, wide, flat pan does the opposite. It spreads the sap thin and gives the steam room to leave. More surface, faster boil, less fuel burned. That is the whole secret of the flue pan, friend, and you can copy it with a flat pan on a backyard burner. One warning before you light anything. Do not finish a big boil on your kitchen stove. 40 gallons of sap becomes 1 gallon of syrup, and every drop of that water leaves as steam. Steam condenses on drywall, wallpaper and cabinetry, and it will ruin them. Move the boil outdoors or into a shed with real ventilation. Watch the steam roll off the pan and fog the glass like breath on a cold window. That fog belongs outside, not in your kitchen. Here is the money. A true commercial evaporator is a serious capital cost, the kind of purchase Grimm was selling to farms with rail access in 1891. You do not need it. A basic backyard flat pan rig comes together for under $50 in spiles, buckets, and a pan. Same principle, 1/100th of the price. Which brings us to number 4, because a better pan means nothing if the hole feeding it is wrong. Number 4 takes us to the University of Vermont, to the Proctor Maple Research Center, and to 2 researchers named Abby Vandenberg and Timothy Perkins. For generations, the standard spile was 7/16 of an inch across. Your grandfather likely drove one that size without a second thought. Proctor's work moved the whole trade to smaller spouts, 5/16, 19/64, and a 1/4 inch. Their trials also found sap yield trending upward with deeper holes, up to 2.5 inches from the outer bark under vacuum. Then there is the number that should stop you cold. Here's the smoking gun. One cited study found that the age of the spout and adapter explained over 40% of the variance in sap yield loss, averaging 7.3 gallons lost per tap. Read that again. Not the weather, not the tree, old dirty hardware. A rusty bit and a tired spile carry bacteria and yeast straight into the wound, and the hole gums up and quits. So here is the how-to. Drill 1.5 to 2 inches deep with a clean, sharp bit. Angle it slightly upward so the sap drains out by gravity. Use a fresh, clean spout every season, and never tap the same hole twice. Move next year's tap a few inches over and let the old one heal. A clean tap hole closes over the season like a shallow scar knitting shut. A dirty one stays open and sours. The payoff here is not a single jar. It is time. A tree tapped clean and tapped right keeps producing for decades. Over-tap it, or foul the holes, and you lose the tree itself, which is the most expensive mistake in the whole business. Proctor's own rule of thumb is plain. Strive for 5, no more than 10, taps per lateral line. Respect the tree and it feeds you for a lifetime, which carries us down to number 3 and to the jar itself. Number 3 is a rule you have already read 100 times and never noticed. It comes from the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. In 2010, the International Maple Syrup Institute petitioned for a change. The USDA adopted it on January 29, 2015, and it took effect March 15, 2015, written into the Federal Register as Rule 2015-01618. For years there had been a Grade B, the dark, strong, old-fashioned syrup your people cooked with. The rule folded it into a single Grade A, split into 4 descriptive classes: golden and delicate, amber and rich, dark and robust, very dark and strong. The dark syrup did not vanish. It got a friendlier name. Now the practical part, because that rule sets the legal density of what you jar. You do not need a laboratory to hit it. Finish your boil at 219 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 7 degrees above where water boils in your kitchen. Or read 66 to 67 bricks on a hydrometer or a refractometer. That is the federal specification, the exact line a commercial packer must clear, and you can clear it with a $5 thermometer. Here is why the number matters beyond the paperwork. Syrup finished too thin holds too much water, and water lets yeast take hold. Underfinished syrup ferments in the jar and spoils. Every soured batch is sap you gathered and fuel you burned, thrown out. Finish at 66 to 67 bricks, and the sugar itself preserves the jar. It resists fermenting on the pantry shelf month after month, exactly as the old-timers needed it to. So that is the middle of our count. Grimm gave us the pan in 1891. Procter gave us the clean, small, angled hole. The USDA in 2015 gave the finished jar its legal name and its density. 300 years of hard-won method, from a machine, from a microscope, from a federal rule, all of it aimed at one honest jar of pure maple on your shelf. But the label on that jar was about to face a cheaper rival born in a laboratory in Iowa. That is number 2 on our list. In 1957, in Clinton, Iowa, 2 biochemists at the Clinton Corn Processing Company set out to make corn taste like cash. Their names were Richard O. Marshall and Earl R. Coey. Their first success was an experimental syrup they called HFCE15, about 15% fructose. It was a prototype. It sat in the lab for 10 years. Then, in February of 1967, Clinton Corn began shipping the first commercial version, marketed as ISO Sugar R30, near 25% fructose. Cheap corn turned sweet by enzymes. Now hear me plain. This was not a plot against maple. Nobody in Iowa was hunting your sugar bush. It was an honest price shift, and honest is the hardest kind to fight. Food companies had a sweetener that cost them less than cane and far less than maple. They used it. Corn syrup rose over the breakfast shelf like floodwater over a low field, slow and quiet until the real thing was standing there alone. Here is the how-to, and it lives on the label. Only a bottle marked 100% pure maple syrup is the real product. If it reads pancake syrup or maple flavoured, that is a different, cheaper item. It is corn syrup wearing a cabin on the front. Read the words before you pay. The payoff is a hard truth, friend. Pure maple costs more per ounce than the blend, and it always will. That is the honest reason the blends own the shelves. Not suppression. Price. And price is exactly the thing one backyard tree is built to beat. Which brings us to number 1. What is one sugar maple in your own yard actually worth in 2026? Start with what the store asks. These are 2026 average retail prices for a gallon of pure maple syrup, pulled from state price surveys and the extension guides at Cornell and the University of Maine. In Maine, $69.80 a gallon. New Hampshire, $64.90. Vermont, $57.10. Michigan, $56.60. New York, $53.80. Wisconsin, $52 even. Pennsylvania, $47.10. That is the price of not making your own. Now here is how you make your own, and I want you to get this part right. Tap only a tree that is roughly 10 to 12 inches across the trunk. Anything skinnier is too young, and one tap on a young tree is a wound it did not earn. One tap. One healthy, mature tree, one hole. From that single tap over one freeze and thaw season, you can expect about 10 gallons of sap. Sap is mostly water. You boil it down at roughly 40 to 1, 40 gallons of sap for 1 gallon of syrup. So 10 gallons of sap boiled long and low gives you about 1 quart of finished syrup. 1 quart from one tree in one spring. Boil it outdoors, neighbour. I mean that as a warning, not a suggestion. A full boil throws off enough steam to soak the drywall and warp the cabinets in a kitchen. An open flame left alone for hours near a building is how sugar houses become bonfires. Never walk away from the fire. Here is the money. Your basic gear, the spile, the bucket, a big stock pot, runs under $50 to start. 1 quart a year does not sound like it beats a $57 gallon. But a sugar maple does not quit. It gives that quart again next spring, and the spring after, for decades. Think of one mature tree as a coin that mints itself again every spring. Under $50, once, against $50 to $70 store gallons for the rest of your life. Your people did that math a long time ago. So here is your one step this week, friend. Walk your yard, find the grey, deeply furrowed bark, the branches growing opposite each other, and mark the maple that measures 10 inches or better. You do not tap today. You just learn which tree is yours. Then tell me one thing in the comments. What is the tree standing in your yard right now, and do you know its name? Sugar maple? Red maple? Or a mystery you have walked past for years? The one that gets the most comments is the one I build next. Now let me pay a debt. Remember that justice of the peace in Montgomery County, New York, back in 1789. One tree tapped 9 days in April, 20 pounds and 1 ounce of hard-grained sugar in his kettle. I told you I would come back to him. Here is the honest comparison. His one tree gave him 20 pounds of sugar. Your one tree, tapped once by hand today, gives you about a quart of syrup. He was not a better man than you. He had a whole family working that kettle, and he had no store to walk to. The gap is not in the tree is the same. The gap is only in how many hands you put on it. So if you have never made a drop, that is not a failing. The convenience was sold to you cheap and sold to you well, but the tree is still standing and the sap still runs. Your people knew this ground. Now you can hand it forward. Next time, we are staying with the freeze and the thaw, because sap is not the only harvest the cold hands you. I want to show you how a hard frost was used to store and sweeten other crops, long before a freezer hummed in anybody's kitchen, and the one November night your grandfather waited for on purpose. If this helped you, do one kind thing. Subscribe, not for me, but so the next person searching for the old way finds it instead of another blend on a shelf. That is the whole reason I sit here. Keep the old ways. They kept us.